Disperse, you know what to do. Rabbit, get on the rabbit.
Yes, sir. Up and get some cover.
Right. Check the dust. Allison, Henderson, lock and load. Buddy, check your railroad.
Welcome back to Lessons from the Front and to Katong, Singapore at my favorite store, Expedimix. Today you're in for a treat. We've got a game of Bolt Action version 3 doubles where myself and Sean, playing Germans, will be up against Dom's US and Alfred's French partisans. We let the bones do the talking, and the dice indicated that we were to play breakthrough from the long table edges in a meeting engagement. This meant that we'd be scoring our points by moving our forces off our opponent's long table edge, and also we'd be moving onto the table. Our battle took place on this beautiful 6x4 foot table, set somewhere in a beautiful village in Normandy. Alfred and Dom won the dice roll to choose table edge, and they would be playing from the top side of the table, whilst Sean and I would be coming in from the bottom of the photograph. So, Sean, how are we going to do this?
So we were thinking of gang up on Dom's army,
Yeah.
and then we will try to slow down Alfred's army at the same time.
Okay guys, so that's the plan. Slow down Alfred's French and gang up against Dom. Although turn 1 was relatively quiet, with most of our forces moving onto the table under cover, there were two key events that would shape the game. Firstly, I snuck my sniper team through the woods and took an aimed shot at the French forward artillery observer perched high in the steeple of the Norman church. In spite of the hard cover provided by the hard walls of this Norman church, the observer team was hit and lost one of its members. Unfortunately for the Germans, the team survived. Alfred passed the morale test. And then secondly, having waited for as long as possible to see where Dom's two Shermans would be arriving, Sean moved his Panzer III onto the table, keeping it in the cover of the woods. He took a long shot down at the first Sherman, but unfortunately missed. Dom's second Sherman then moved onto the table and swiftly dealt with the Panzer III, leaving the Panzer III a burning wreck. This swung the balance of armor power strongly in the Americans' favor. With Dom's two Shermans dominating the center of the table, Sean and I decided to change our battle plans and to instead hold the table center and try and delay any of the French and American forces from leaving the table through the middle, and to push on both flanks, on the left and the right. So whilst Sean pushed with infantry on both flanks, supported on the left with my Luchs and on his right with his 250, I pushed in the center with my Stu 4 and my Hanomag that was carrying two 6-man squads of veteran infantry. Both vehicles opened fire at Alfred's resistance, catching them in the open as they dashed across the road towards the village from the woods at the far end of the table. First with the Hanomag's MMG, and then firing an HE round from the Stu's powerful 105mm hull-mounted gun. Despite the attention Alfred's resistance fighters were getting from the two vehicles, they were able to scurry across into the nearest building at the edge of the village. However, this did result in Dom diverting one of his Shermans into the village to deal with a strong show of force by the Hanomag and Stu. Although the Sherman missed his shot at my Stu, the threat of the Sherman did force the Hanomag and Stu to move into cover, with the Hanomag ducking behind the building at the left and the Stu swinging to the right to move behind the church. It was not only the presence of the Sherman that forced the split, but also the forward air observer that had called in an attack from the air. So we're at the end of turn 2. Things are not looking too good for the Germans. We've already lost our Panzer III. The two Shermans are looking quite dominant in the center of the table. I'm not too sure how we're going to stop the French and the Americans getting off our side of the table. We're just going to have to press through really hard. As mentioned earlier, the sniper shot at the forward air observer would indeed shape the game. as not killing that forward air observer allowed Alfred to call in a strike during turn 2. So, turn 3 commenced with an air attack successfully being called in. But unfortunately for the French, they had miscalculated the coordinates of the strike, which instead came down on Alfred's brave resistance fighters that had dashed across the fields during the first 2 turns to take cover behind the strong walls of the Norman church. Although the ground attack had resulted in the pinning of several German units near the church, it was this French resistance squad that took the brunt of the attack, creating an opportunity for the Germans to drive on the right to press forward their advance. I drove my Stu around the church and onto the road in support of Sean's push with his infantry on the right, but dismounted my 2 veteran squads from the Hanomag in an effort to slow any drive the Americans or French might make through the center of the village. In the meanwhile, Dom, who was using his 2 Shermans to great effect, advanced a Sherman down the road and opened fire at my Luchs. The Luchs wrecked away from the Sherman, and after a brief firefight with GIs, was able to race off the far edge of the table and bag 3 valuable points for the German cause. Dom's infantry had been making their way through the village and woods towards the German left, and although they were unable to prevent the speedy Luchs from exiting the table, they were able to trap and eliminate Sean's infantry that had been unable to keep up with the Luchs. With the Luchs off the table and the German infantry eliminated, Dom's GIs and Sherman began to move towards their objectives. Dom's Sherman, in spite of a futile attempt by my commander to slow his advance, moved off the table, squaring the points at 3 each, but more ominously, had 3 squads of GIs also heading towards the table edge. With the US forces making very good progress against our left, holding the center became increasingly important for Sean and my Germans. Alfred's mortar had already snuffed out Sean's squad holding the small, wooded area across the road from the restaurant where Dom's GIs had earlier taken up positions, and the remnants of those GIs took advantage of the gap and began to move down the road that leads off the German center table edge. Alfred also hoped to gain from the success of his mortar, pushing his resistance fighters through the village center. With one of my veteran squads absorbing fire from the Sherman, I responded to Alfred's drive with an assault against his advancing resistance fighters with the 2nd veteran squad, and then followed that success up in the subsequent turn by eliminating the small GI squad that was making for the table edge.
Right, so we have a real chance of winning this one. I've taken the Luchs off the table. If Sean can get his infantry unit off the table, that'll give us 6 victory points. They're going to have a tough one trying to catch up to those 6 points.
So at the end of turn 5, I put the Stu into gear and moved the maximum distance forward towards the French left, hoping to either smash my way through to the table edge or at least wrestle attention away from Sean's infantry that was running along the right table edge. But at the start of turn 6, Alfred's anti-tank rifle team returned my Stu's lack of respect by rolling 2 consecutive 6s that not only resulted in much eating of cheese all along the French lines, but also in the Stu's crew panicking and running away from their vehicle as its engine caught fire. However, with the very last order dice of turn 6, and at the end of our 5-hour-long game, Sean used the distraction at the barn to run a squad off the far table edge and to secure an additional 3 points. And with that, the Germans had narrowly claimed a 6-5 winning draw. We trust you enjoyed the contents of the video, and please do leave your thoughts on this game in the comments below. Alfred, Dom, Sean and I would also like to thank Expedimix for hosting our game, and to those who came along to support us. I look forward to catching you in the next episode, but in the meantime, happy gaming!